Lieutenant Sarah Chen pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of Sector 7, feeling the vibrations of the massive space station humming through the hull. The Galactic Defense Academy's primary training facility hung in the void between three-star systems, a testament to the alliance that kept the known galaxy from tearing itself apart. Through the reinforced viewport beside her, she could see the training ships conducting their daily exercises, their engines painting brief streaks of light against the star-filled darkness. Sarah had been at the Academy for 8 months now, longer than any human before her. The previous 17 human cadets had all been dismissed within their first few weeks, deemed unsuitable for advanced combat training by the alien instructors who ran the facility. The official reports always cited the same reasons: inadequate reflexes, insufficient physical capabilities, and poor adaptation to multi-species combat scenarios. But Sarah was different, not because she was stronger or faster than her predecessors, but because she understood something they hadn't. The Academy wasn't just testing their physical abilities, it was testing their ability to survive in a universe where humans were considered the bottom tier of warrior species. The corridor around her bustled with activity as cadets from various species moved between training sessions. A group of Chronari warriors stomped past, their massive forms encased in practice armor that gleamed under the artificial lighting. Each Chronari stood nearly 8 feet tall, with dense muscle mass that made human bodybuilders look frail by comparison. Their thick grey skin could deflect small arms fire, and their forearms allowed them to wield multiple weapons simultaneously. Behind them glided a squad of Zephyrian cadets, their movements so fluid and quick that Sarah's eyes struggled to track them. The Zephyrians were built for speed, their elongated limbs and gossamer-thin bodies allowing them to move at velocities that made human martial artists look like they were swimming through mud. Their large, multifaceted eyes could process visual information at rates that boggled human comprehension. Then came the Nexus units, synthetic beings whose crystalline bodies housed processing cores that could calculate thousands of combat scenarios per second. They moved with mechanical precision, each step perfectly calculated for maximum efficiency. Their sensors could detect heartbeats from across a room and predict enemy movements based on muscle tension and breathing patterns. Sarah watched them all pass, noting how none of them acknowledged her presence. To them, she was an anomaly, a human who had somehow managed to survive longer than expected, but still ultimately inferior. The Academy's ranking system made this clear enough. Out of the 847 cadets currently enrolled, Sarah ranked 847th, dead last. The ranking wasn't just about pride. It determined everything from meal allocation to equipment access to training opportunities. High-ranking cadets received the best gear, the most advanced instruction, and access to elite combat simulations. Low-ranking cadets like Sarah made do with whatever was left over. Her communicator chimed, displaying a message that made her stomach tighten. Report to Training Bay Omega-7 immediately. Instructor HFY. The message was brief, but Sarah knew what it meant. Instructor HFY was a Draconian, one of the most feared warrior species in the galaxy. Draconians were apex predators from a world where everything was designed to kill, and they brought that savage efficiency to their teaching methods. Sarah made her way through the winding corridors of the Academy, passing training bays where she could hear the sounds of combat, the clash of metal against chitin, the hum of energy weapons, and the occasional roar of pain or triumph. The Academy never slept, with training sessions running around the clock to accommodate the different biological rhythms of its multi-species student body. Training Bay Omega-7 was located in one of the older sections of the station, where the corridors were narrower and the lighting more subdued. As Sarah approached the entrance, she could see other cadets emerging from the bay, many of them bearing fresh wounds and expressions of exhausted defeat. A Zephyrian cadet limped past her, one of his elongated arms hanging uselessly at his side. The bay doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing an arena roughly the size of a football field. The floor was made of a specially designed metal that could shift and change configuration during training exercises, creating obstacles, trenches, or elevated platforms as needed. The walls were lined with sensors and projectors that could create holographic enemies or environmental hazards. Standing in the center of the arena was Instructor HFY. Like all Draconians, he stood over 9 feet tall, his scaled hide a mottled pattern of dark green and black that seemed to shift in the arena's lighting. His elongated skull housed eyes that glowed with an internal bioluminescence, and his mouth was filled with rows of serrated teeth designed for tearing through armor and flesh. 4 muscular arms extended from his torso, each ending in clawed hands that could slice through steel. But it wasn't his physical presence that made HFY so terrifying. It was his reputation. In over 2 centuries of military service, he had never lost a single combat engagement. His strategic brilliance was matched only by his absolute ruthlessness in battle. The Academy had recruited him specifically because his teaching methods produced the most effective warriors in the galaxy. Human, HFY said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the arena floor. You continue to disappoint. 8 months of training, and you remain at the bottom of every classification. Sarah stepped into the arena, the doors sealing behind her with a finality that made her pulse quicken. She had learned early on that showing fear in front of HFY was a mistake that led to even more brutal training sessions. Yes, Instructor, she replied, keeping her voice steady. Today, we will determine whether humanity deserves its place in this academy, or whether your species should be relegated to support roles in the Galactic Defense Force. HFY began walking around her in a slow circle, his glowing eyes never leaving her face. You will face a series of combat scenarios designed to test your reflexes, tactical thinking, and ability to operate under extreme pressure. The arena floor began to shift around them, metal plates rising and falling to create a complex maze of barriers and elevated positions. Holographic projectors hummed to life, filling the space with the image of a ruined cityscape. The smell of smoke and burning metal filled the air as environmental simulators added atmospheric effects to complete the illusion. Your mission is simple, HFY continued, moving to an observation platform that rose from the arena floor. Survive for 10 minutes while my training drones attempt to eliminate you. The drones are programmed with combat algorithms based on actual enemy species you might face in real warfare. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. She had heard about these particular training sessions from other cadets. The mortality rate was officially 0, but only because the medical bay was staffed with the best trauma specialists in the galaxy. Serious injuries were common, and some cadets never fully recovered from the psychological trauma. You will have access to standard infantry equipment. HFY gestured to a weapons rack that emerged from the floor nearby. Choose wisely. Your selections will determine your survival. Sarah approached the weapons rack, her mind racing through possibilities. The selection was impressive. Energy rifles, plasma cannons, gravitational disruptors, and various types of melee weapons designed for different alien physiologies. Most cadets went for the most powerful weapons available, reasoning that superior firepower would give them an edge. But Sarah had learned something during her months at the academy that most other cadets missed. The training wasn't about using the best equipment. It was about understanding the fundamentals of combat and survival. She selected a basic energy rifle, a combat knife, and a small sensor array that would help her detect incoming threats. Interesting choices, HFY observed. Most cadets opt for heavier weaponry. Heavy weapons require more energy and create more heat signatures, Sarah replied, checking the rifle's charge level. In a survival scenario, stealth and mobility are more valuable than raw firepower. For the first time since she had entered the arena, HFY's expression showed something that might have been approval. Perhaps humanity possesses some tactical intelligence after all. Very well. Begin. The arena exploded into chaos. Training drones descended from concealed positions in the ceiling. Sleek, spider-like machines, armed with energy weapons and programmed with the combat behaviors of various hostile species. Sarah dove behind a concrete barrier as coherent energy beams seared through the air where she had been standing moments before. Her sensor array immediately began feeding her information about her attackers. 7 drones total, arranged in a loose formation that would allow them to attack from multiple angles while providing mutual support. Their movement patterns indicated they were programmed with HFY swarm tactics, a particularly nasty form of coordinated assault that had devastated human colonies during the border wars. Sarah's training kicked in as she analyzed the situation. The HFY approach relied on overwhelming their enemies with coordinated attacks from multiple vectors. The key to defeating them was disrupting their formation and forcing them to engage individually rather than as a group. She waited until the drones moved closer, then activated a smoke grenade that filled the immediate area with thick obscuring clouds. The drone's sensors would be degraded, but not completely blinded. She used the cover to move to a new position, her combat knife ready. When the first drone emerged from the smoke, Sarah was waiting. She grabbed it with her free hand and drove the knife into its central processor, disabling it instantly. The move was risky. It required getting within range of the drone's weapons, but it eliminated one threat while conserving ammunition. The remaining drones adapted quickly, spreading out to prevent her from using the same tactic again. Energy beams crisscrossed through the smoke as they fired at where they calculated she should be, but Sarah was already moving. She had studied the arena's layout during her approach and knew there was a maintenance shaft behind one of the fallen concrete blocks. She reached the shaft just as the smoke began to clear, rolling inside as energy beams scorched the ground behind her. The shaft was narrow, Designed for automated maintenance units rather than human-sized combatants, that it connected to other parts of the arena's infrastructure. Through her sensor array, she could track the drones as they searched for her. Their programming was sophisticated, but it was still based on predictable patterns. They would establish a perimeter around the area where she had disappeared, then systematically search each possible hiding spot. Sarah crawled through the maintenance tunnel until she reached an access point near the arena's eastern wall. She emerged quietly, using the sound of the searching drones to mask any noise she might make. 6 drones remained active, and they had indeed formed a search perimeter just as she had predicted. From her new position, she had a clear shot at 2 of them. Sarah raised her energy rifle and fired twice in quick succession, the coherent energy beams striking both drones in their central processors. They tumbled from the air, sparks cascading from their damaged systems. The remaining 4 drones immediately converged on her position, their tactical programming shifting to direct assault mode. Sarah was already moving, using the arena's shifting terrain to stay ahead of their targeting systems. She leaped over a low wall, rolled behind an overturned vehicle, and sprinted across an open courtyard while energy beams traced deadly patterns around her. Her sensor array detected movement from above. One of the drones had anticipated her path and positioned itself for an overhead attack. Sarah threw herself sideways just as a concentrated energy beam vaporized the ground where she had been running. She came up firing, her rifle's beam catching the airborne drone's center mass. It crashed into a wall with a satisfying crunch of destroyed electronics. 3 drones remained, and they were getting smarter. Instead of pursuing her directly, they had taken defensive positions that would force her to expose herself to attack any of them. It was a classic tactical problem: how to attack a prepared enemy position without superior numbers or firepower. Sarah checked her remaining ammunition. Half depleted, she needed to end this quickly. That's when her sensor array detected something that made her pulse quicken. One of the drones was moving in a predictable patrol pattern, sweeping back and forth across a specific sector while its companions maintained overwatch. It was a textbook formation, which meant it had a textbook weakness. Sarah picked up a piece of rubble and threw it toward the opposite end of the arena. As expected, 2 of the drones immediately moved to investigate the noise, breaking their defensive formation. The patrolling drone continued its sweep, momentarily isolated from its companions. Sarah sprinted toward the isolated drone, firing as she ran. Her first shot missed, but her second struck it in the sensor cluster, blinding it. She was on it before it could compensate, driving her combat knife into its power core. The 2 remaining drones had realized their mistake and were converging on her position fast. Sarah grabbed the damaged drone she had just destroyed and hurled it at the nearest attacker. The collision sent both machines tumbling, but only one of them would be getting back up. The final drone hovered 20 feet away, its weapons trained on her. Sarah's rifle was nearly depleted, and she had no cover between herself and her remaining opponent. For a moment, they faced each other across the artificial battlefield, predator and prey, in a deadly standoff. Then Sarah smiled. She raised her rifle and fired, not at the drone, but at a support beam that held up a section of debris directly above it. The beam vaporized, and tons of concrete and metal came crashing down. The drone tried to maneuver clear, but Sarah had calculated the collapse pattern perfectly. It disappeared beneath the avalanche with a final electronic shriek. Silence fell over the arena. Sarah stood among the wreckage of 7 training drones, breathing hard but uninjured. Her rifle's power cell was completely drained, but she was alive. The arena's holographic environment faded away, returning the space to its original metal configuration. Instructor Vexay descended from his observation platform, his forearms clasped behind his back in a gesture that Sarah had learned indicated deep thought. 9 minutes and 37 seconds, he said finally. Impressive. Sarah felt a surge of pride but kept her expression neutral. Showing emotion in front of Vexay was another mistake she had learned to avoid. However, the instructor continued, your performance, while adequate, still demonstrates the fundamental limitations of your species. Your reflexes are inferior to a Zephyrian's. Your strength cannot match a Chronari's. Your processing speed is a fraction of a Nexus unit's capabilities. Sarah felt her brief moment of triumph evaporate. Despite everything she had just accomplished, she was still being reminded of her species' inadequacies. But, Vexay said, and something in his tone made Sarah look up sharply, you demonstrated something that none of those species possess in abundance. You showed tactical innovation under pressure. You used your environment as a weapon. You turned your weaknesses into advantages. The draconian instructor began walking slowly around the arena, his clawed feet clicking on the metal floor. Tell me, human, what do you believe is your species' greatest weakness? Sarah considered the question carefully. It felt like a trap, but Vex High's teaching methods often involved philosophical discussions that led to deeper understanding. "Our physical limitations," she said finally. "We're weaker, slower, and less durable than most other species." "Incorrect," Vex Hay replied immediately. "Your greatest weakness is your tendency to accept others' assessments of your capabilities. You have spent 8 months believing that you are inferior because other species possess superior physical attributes. But warfare is not decided by physical prowess alone." He stopped directly in front of her, his glowing eyes boring into hers. "Your species survived on a death world for millions of years, developing cunning, adaptability, and an almost supernatural ability to find solutions to impossible problems. Yet you come here and try to compete on terms dictated by others." Sarah felt something shift in her understanding. All this time, she had been trying to match the other species' strengths instead of leveraging her own. "Tomorrow," Vexhai continued, "you will face a different type of challenge. One that will require you to embrace what makes humans unique rather than attempting to overcome what makes you different." As Sarah left the training bay, her mind was racing with new possibilities. For the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt like she understood what she was really being tested for. It wasn't about becoming the strongest or fastest cadet. It was about becoming the most effective one. The corridor outside was empty now, most cadets having retired for their respective sleep cycles. Sarah made her way to the human quarters, a small section of the station adapted for her species' environmental needs. The gravity was adjusted to Earth normal, the atmospheric composition was optimized for human physiology, and the lighting matched the circadian rhythms humans had evolved under. Her quarters were Spartan, a sleeping alcove, a small desk, and a storage unit for personal belongings. Sarah had few possessions, having brought only the essentials when she was selected for the academy program. She sat on her narrow bunk and pulled up her personal datapad, reviewing the combat footage from her training session. Watching herself move through the arena, Sarah began to see patterns she hadn't noticed during the actual fight. Her movements weren't as fluid as Zephyrian's, but they were unpredictable. Her weapon handling wasn't as precise as a Nexus unit's, but it was adaptive. Her strength couldn't match a Chronari's, but she used leverage and environmental factors to multiply her effectiveness. She was beginning to understand what Instructor Vexay meant about embracing human uniqueness. Humans weren't just inferior versions of other species, they were something entirely different. Something that might be more valuable than anyone realized. Sarah set down the datapad and lay back on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since arriving at the Galactic Defense Academy, she felt ready to face them on her own terms. Outside her viewport, the stars wheeled slowly through the void, silent witnesses to the civilizations that rose and fell among them. Somewhere out there, threats to galactic peace were gathering strength, preparing to test the alliance that kept the known worlds safe. The Academy existed to forge warriors capable of meeting those threats. Sarah closed her eyes and let sleep take her, unaware that her performance in the training bay had been observed by more than just Instructor Vexhai. Deep within the Academy's command center, other instructors were reviewing her combat footage with interest. The human cadet was proving to be more resourceful than anyone had anticipated. And in the vast machinery of galactic politics and military planning, gears were beginning to turn that would soon place Sarah Chen at the center of events that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. Sarah woke to the sound of alarms echoing through the station corridors. Her chronometer showed it was 0347 hours, well before the scheduled start of the daily training cycle. Emergency lighting had replaced the normal illumination, casting everything in a red glow that made the shadows seem deeper and more threatening. She rolled out of her bunk and quickly donned her standard uniform, her mind already racing through possibilities. Station-wide alerts were rare at the Academy. The facility was protected by some of the most advanced defensive systems in the galaxy, and its location between three-star systems made surprise attacks virtually impossible. Her communicator crackled to life with a priority message. "All cadets report to primary assembly immediately. This is not a drill." Sarah joined the stream of cadets moving through the corridors toward the station's central hub. The primary assembly was a massive amphitheater capable of holding the Academy's entire population, used only for the most important announcements and ceremonies. She could see the tension in the other cadets' faces. Chronari warriors checking and rechecking their equipment, Zephyrians moving with nervous energy, Nexus units exchanging rapid data bursts among themselves. The amphitheater was already half full when Sarah arrived, with cadets filing into sections organized by species and rank. She took her place in the designated human section, which consisted of a single row of seats. Being the only human cadet at the academy had its disadvantages, but at least she always had plenty of personal space. The central platform rose from the amphitheater floor, carrying with it the academy's senior staff. Admiral Cathar stood at the center, a threnody whose crystalline exoskeleton reflected the emergency lighting in prismatic patterns. The threnody were one of the oldest spacefaring civilizations in the galaxy, known for their strategic brilliance and unwavering dedication to galactic peace. Beside the Admiral stood the Academy's other senior instructors, including Vex Hay. The Draconian's usual air of controlled menace seemed heightened, his clawed hands flexing unconsciously as he surveyed the assembled cadets. "Cadets?" Admiral Cathar began, her voice amplified throughout the amphitheater by the station's communication systems. 12 hours ago, long-range sensors detected a fleet of unidentified vessels approaching the Kepler sector. These ships do not match any known configurations in our database, and they have not responded to standard communication protocols. A murmur ran through the assembled cadets. The Kepler sector contained 3 inhabited systems and served as a major trading hub for the Galactic Alliance. An attack there would be devastating not just in terms of casualties, but for the economic disruption it would cause. Intelligence analysis suggests these vessels may be of Void Reaper origin, the Admiral continued, and the murmur became a wave of shocked gasps. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The Void Reapers were legendary, a nomadic fleet of warriors that had appeared at the edge of known space 50 years ago and had been slowly working their way inward ever since. They possessed technology that seemed to violate known physics, ships that could phase in and out of normal space-time, and weapons that could destabilize entire star systems. What made them truly terrifying was their apparent motivation. Unlike other hostile species that fought for territory or resources, the Void Reapers seemed to exist solely to test the combat effectiveness of other civilizations. They would attack a system, engage its defenders in increasingly complex battles, and then withdraw, leaving behind detailed recordings of their enemy's tactical capabilities. "The Galactic Defense Force is mobilizing to intercept this fleet," Admiral Cathar said. "However, preliminary intelligence suggests that the Void Reapers may be planning something unprecedented. Instead of their usual hit-and-run tactics, they appear to be preparing for a sustained engagement." The implications of this sent another wave of unease through the amphitheater. If the Void Reapers were abandoning their traditional tactics, it could mean they had found something worth fighting for, or that they had decided the galaxy's defenders were finally ready for their ultimate test. Under these circumstances, the Admiral continued, the Academy Council has made an extraordinary decision. The top 100 cadets will be temporarily assigned to active duty with the Defense Fleet. You will serve as tactical advisors and support personnel for the fleet's command staff. Sarah's heart sank. The top 100 cadets. With her ranking of 847 out of 847, she wouldn't even be considered for such an assignment. But Admiral Cathar wasn't finished speaking. Additionally, 5 cadets have been selected for a special assignment that may prove crucial to understanding Void Reaper capabilities. These cadets will accompany an advanced reconnaissance mission into the Kepler sector. The Admiral's prismatic eyes scanned the assembled cadets. Cadet Thekmor of the Kronari, a massive warrior in the front section, stood and acknowledged the selection. Cadet Zelthara of the Zephyrians, an elongated figure near the center of the amphitheater, rose gracefully. Nexus Unit Designation Omega-7. One of the synthetic beings in the artificial intelligence section activated its acknowledgement protocols. Cadet Vordash of the Draconians, a scaled figure that resembled a smaller version of Instructor Vexi, hissed its acceptance. Sarah waited for the 5th name, already planning how she might volunteer for support roles with the fleet. Every cadet dreamed of seeing real action, and even a minor assignment would be better than remaining at the academy while history was being made. And Cadet Sarah Chen of Earth. For a moment, Sarah wasn't sure she had heard correctly. The silence in her section of the amphitheater seemed to confirm that others were equally surprised. The human cadet ranked last in every category, selected for one of the most important missions in recent galactic history. She stood slowly, aware that hundreds of alien eyes were focused on her. Some showed confusion, others showed what might have been contempt. The human, who couldn't match any of their physical capabilities, had somehow been chosen over cadets who ranked hundreds of positions higher. Admiral Cathar continued, as if the selection was perfectly normal. Selected cadets will report to Docking Bay 7 immediately for briefing and equipment assignment. The reconnaissance mission will depart in 6 hours. As the assembly broke up, Sarah found herself surrounded by questioning stares from other cadets. She made her way toward the exit, trying to ignore the whispered conversations that followed her movement. Why would they select a human for such a critical mission? Her combat scores are barely adequate. Perhaps it's some kind of political gesture to Earth's government. Sarah kept walking, but the comments stung. She had worked harder than any cadet at the academy, pushing herself beyond her species' apparent limitations, only to have her selection treated as charity or politics rather than merit. Docking Bay 7 was located in the academy's military section, an area Sarah had rarely visited. The corridors here were wider and more heavily reinforced, designed to accommodate the movement of large equipment and combat vehicles. Security checkpoints scanned her identification and biometrics before allowing her access to the bay itself. The reconnaissance ship waiting for them was unlike anything Sarah had seen before. Roughly the size of a corvette, it was built from some kind of adaptive metal that seemed to shift and flow even while stationary. Its hull was covered with sensor arrays and scanning equipment that looked more like organic growths than technological installations. "Beautiful, isn't she?" a voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see a figure in an advanced combat suit approaching. The suit was clearly of human design, but modified with technology she didn't recognize. The helmet retracted, revealing the face of a woman who appeared to be in her 40s, with short grey hair and eyes that held the calculating look of someone who had seen extensive combat. "Commander Maria Santos, Galactic Defense Force Intelligence," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'll be leading this mission." Sarah shook the offered hand, noting the firm grip and calloused palms of someone who had spent years handling weapons and equipment. "Permission to speak freely, Commander?" Sarah asked. "Granted." "Why was I selected for this mission?" "My academy ranking is dead last, yes I know," Commander Santos interrupted with a slight smile. "What you don't know is that ranking cadets by traditional combat metrics was never the point of your time here. The academy has been conducting a different kind of evaluation, one focused on adaptive thinking and unconventional problem solving." She gestured toward the reconnaissance ship. "This mission isn't about brute force or superior reflexes. We're going up against an enemy that operates according to rules we don't understand, using technology that shouldn't be possible. Standard tactical approaches have failed against the Void Reapers repeatedly." The other selected cadets began arriving at the docking bay. Thickmore lumbered in, carrying what looked like enough weapons to arm a small squad, his massive frame making the spacious bay seem cramped. Zelthara flowed through the entrance with her characteristic grace, her large eyes already studying the reconnaissance ship with obvious interest. Nexus Unit Omega-7 rolled forward on its mechanical legs, sensors extended and scanning everything in the immediate vicinity. The synthetic being's crystalline body pulsed with internal light as it processed the vast amount of data its instruments were collecting. Vord entered last, moving with the predatory stride common to all Draconians. Like his instructor Vex High, he stood over 8 feet tall, his scaled hide bearing the ritual scars that marked him as a proven warrior even before coming to the academy. "Now that we're all here," Commander Santos said, "let me explain what we're walking into." She activated a holographic projector that filled the space above them with a 3-dimensional star map. The Kepler sector appeared as a cluster of 3-star systems, with shipping routes marked in blue and defensive positions shown in red. "The Void Reaper fleet consists of 12 vessels, each one larger than our most advanced dreadnoughts," Santos continued. "They're currently positioned here, at the edge of the sector, maintaining what appears to be a defensive formation." Thickmore rumbled something in his native language, which the universal translator rendered as, "Void Reapers do not maintain defensive formations. They attack or they withdraw." "Exactly," Santos replied. "Which is why intelligence believes they're waiting for something. Our mission is to get close enough to determine what that something might be." Zelthara's voice was like wind chimes when she spoke. "Standard reconnaissance satellites would provide the same intelligence from a safer distance." "Standard reconnaissance satellites have already been deployed," Santos said. "All of them stopped transmitting the moment they entered Void Reaper sensor range. Whatever technology they're using, it's capable of detecting and neutralizing our most advanced stealth systems." Omega-7's mechanical voice provided a steady counterpoint to the conversation. "Probability of mission success using conventional approaches, 12%. Probability of discovering actionable intelligence, 4%. Which brings us to our tactical approach," Santos continued. "Instead of trying to outmatch Void Reaper technology with superior equipment, we're going to use something they won't expect: unpredictability." She manipulated the holographic display to show their planned approach route. Instead of following a direct path to the Void Reaper position, their course took them through 3 different star systems, using gravitational slingshots and debris fields to mask their approach. The ship we'll be using is a prototype built specifically for this type of mission, Santos explained. Its hull can adapt to mimic the electromagnetic signature of space debris, asteroids, or even stellar phenomena. The key is that it requires constant manual adjustment by the crew to maintain its camouflage. Vordash hissed softly, a sound that indicated either approval or anticipation. You require warriors who can think beyond programmed responses. Exactly. The Void Reapers have faced fleets led by tactical computers, squadrons of enhanced soldiers, and commanders who follow textbook strategies. What they haven't faced is a crew that can adapt and improvise faster than their analysis systems can predict. Sarah began to understand why she had been selected. Her performance in Instructor Vex's combat simulation had demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptive thinking Santos was describing. While other cadets had relied on superior physical abilities or advanced equipment, she had used her environment and unconventional tactics to achieve her objectives. Each of you has been chosen for a specific reason, Santos continued. Thakmor, your experience with heavy weapon systems will be crucial if we need to fight our way out. Zalthara, your species' enhanced reflexes will be essential for piloting maneuvers that would be impossible for other races. The Zephyrian's gossamer features showed what might have been pleasure at the acknowledgement of her abilities. Omega-7, your computational abilities will help us process the massive amounts of data we'll be collecting about Void Reaper technology. Vordash, your understanding of predator psychology will be invaluable in anticipating their tactical decisions. She turned to Sarah last. And you, Cadet Chen, are here because humans have a unique gift for finding solutions that no one else would think to attempt. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. Being valued for her species' problem-solving abilities was gratifying, but she was also acutely aware of the responsibility that came with such recognition.
Questions? Santos asked.
Thakmor raised one of his massive arms. What are our rules of engagement if we are detected? Survive and escape with whatever intelligence we can gather, Santos replied immediately. Under no circumstances are we to engage in direct combat unless absolutely necessary for mission survival. The Void Reapers have never been defeated in a straight fight. What about communication with command? Omega-7 asked. Limited to emergency situations only. Any transmission could give away our position and compromise the mission. Zelthara's question came in her wind chime voice. How close do we need to get to collect meaningful intelligence?
Santos manipulated the holographic display again, showing the Void Reaper fleet in greater detail. Close enough to penetrate their sensor network and record their communication protocols.
Roughly 50,000 kilometers. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 50,000 kilometers would place them well within the range of Void Reaper weapons, with no possibility of escape if they were detected. I won't lie to you, Santos said, her expression serious. This mission has a high probability of failure. If any of you want to withdraw, now is the time to do it. None of the cadets moved. Whatever their individual motivations, they were all committed to the mission. Very well. Equipment briefing begins in 1 hour, we launch in 5 hours. Use whatever time you have left to prepare yourselves mentally for what's coming. As the cadets dispersed to their individual preparations, Sarah found herself standing alone in the docking bay, looking up at the reconnaissance ship that would carry them into danger. The adaptive hull continued its slow hypnotic shifting, and she wondered if she would live long enough to see it again after their mission was complete. The next few hours passed in a blur of technical briefings, equipment checks, and final preparations. Sarah studied the ship's systems until she could operate them in her sleep, memorized the profiles of known Void Reaper vessel types, and ran through dozens of emergency scenarios. When the time came to board the ship, she felt as ready as anyone could be for a mission with such uncertain parameters. The reconnaissance vessel's interior was cramped but efficient, with 5 acceleration couches arranged around a central command console. Commander Santos took the pilot's position, her hands dancing over controls that seemed to respond to her thoughts as much as her touch. All systems green, docking clamps releasing. We are clear of the Academy. Through the ship's viewports, Sarah watched the massive bulk of the Galactic Defense Academy shrink into the distance. Soon it was just another point of light among the stars, indistinguishable from the countless other artificial objects that orbited through space. First course correction in 10 minutes, Santos announced. From this point forward, we're committed to the mission. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Sarah settled back into her acceleration couch and tried to calm her racing heart. Somewhere ahead of them, the Void Reapers waited in their mysterious formations, pursuing goals that no one in the galaxy truly understood. In a few hours, she would either be dead or she would have contributed to the most important intelligence-gathering mission in recent galactic history. Either way, her life would never be the same again. The reconnaissance ship Phantom's Edge slipped through space like a wraith, its adaptive hull continuously shifting to match the electromagnetic signature of whatever celestial body it happened to be passing. Sarah watched through the viewports as they skimmed past the outer edge of a debris field, the ship's camouflage making it appear as just another chunk of twisted metal drifting in the void. They had been traveling for 18 hours, taking an indirect route through 3 star systems to mask their approach to the Kepler sector. The crew had settled into a routine of watches, with each member taking turns monitoring the ship's systems, while the others rested or studied intelligence reports about their target. Sarah was currently on sensor duty, her eyes focused on the displays that showed the space around them in exquisite detail. The ship's scanning array was unlike anything she had encountered at the Academy. Instead of simply detecting objects and energy signatures, it seemed to analyze the very fabric of space-time itself. "Picking up gravitational anomalies ahead," she reported to Commander Santos, who was reviewing tactical data at the Central Command Station. "What kind of anomalies?" Santos asked without looking up from her displays. Sarah studied the readings more carefully. The patterns were subtle, barely detectable fluctuations in local gravitational fields that could easily be dismissed as natural phenomena. But something about their regularity caught her attention. "They're too regular to be natural," she said finally. "Like echoes of something that passed through this area recently." Santos immediately moved to Sarah's station, her expression alert. "Show me." Sarah highlighted the anomalous readings on the main display. Here, here, and here. The gravitational disturbances form a pattern consistent with large mass displacement, but there's nothing in this area that should create such effects. Unless something was here and left, Vor added from his position at the weapons station. The Draconian had been unusually quiet during the journey, but his predator's instincts were clearly engaged now. Omega-7's mechanical voice provided analysis. Calculating mass and velocity based on gravitational displacement patterns. Object mass, approximately 2.7 million tons. Velocity at time of passage, 0.03 light speed. Course, bearing 17 Mach 4, toward Kepler Sector Primary. The crew exchanged glances. A 2.7 million-ton object moving at 3% of light speed could only be one thing. A Void Reaper dreadnought. "Time since passage?" Santos asked. "Approximately 14 hours, Omega-7 replied. This vessel was traveling ahead of us along our planned route." Santos cursed softly in Spanish, then switched back to Standard Galactic. "That means they know we're coming." "Not necessarily," Sarah said, studying the gravitational patterns more closely. "The timing could be coincidental. But, Commander, I'm seeing something else in these readings." She manipulated the display to highlight additional anomalies. "There are smaller disturbances here, much fainter. If I'm reading this correctly, the large vessel was accompanied by smaller craft, scouts or escorts." Takmor's rumbling voice carried a note of concern. "Void Reapers do not use escort vessels. Their dreadnoughts operate independently, which means they're adapting their tactics," Zelthara observed, her windchime voice tense. "They're learning from their previous engagements." The implications of this sent a chill through the crew. If the Void Reapers were modifying their standard operational procedures, it suggested they were preparing for something far more significant than their usual hit-and-run attacks. "Continue on course," Santos decided, after a moment of consideration. "But increase passive scanning to maximum sensitivity. I want to know about any gravitational disturbance larger than a pebble." The next 6 hours passed in tense silence as they continued toward the Kepler sector. Sarah's readings showed increasing signs of recent Void Reaper activity. Gravitational echoes, residual energy signatures, and subtle distortions in local space that indicated the passage of exotic technologies. When they finally reached the edge of the Kepler sector, what they found defied all expectations. "By the ancient makers." Omega-7's voice held an electronic note of amazement that Sarah hadn't known the synthetic being was capable of producing. Through the main viewport, they could see the Void Reaper fleet arranged in a formation unlike anything in the tactical databases. Instead of the loose predatory groupings they typically employed, 12 massive dreadnoughts hung in space in perfect geometric alignment, their dark hulls creating a complex three-dimensional mandala against the stars. But it wasn't the formation that took Sarah's breath away. It was what occupied the space between the ships. Crackling arcs of energy connected each dreadnought to its neighbors, creating a web of power that pulsed with an almost organic rhythm. At the center of this web, space itself seemed to be bending and twisting, reality distorting in ways that made her eyes water to look at directly. "Are they opening some kind of portal?" Thakmore asked, his massive hands unconsciously gripping his weapon controls. Negative, Omega-7 replied, its senses focused on the phenomenon. Analysis indicates they are manipulating local space-time to create a resonance field. Purpose unknown. Santos was already activating the ship's recording systems, capturing every detail of the unprecedented display. Whatever they're doing, this is why they've been waiting. This is what they came here to accomplish. Zelthara's enhanced vision allowed her to see details that escaped the others. The energy patterns are not random. They follow mathematical progressions that suggest some kind of computational process. They're calculating something, Sarah realized, studying the rhythm of the energy pulses. Something that requires the combined processing power of their entire fleet. As they watched, the space-time distortion at the center of the Void Reaper formation began to stabilize into a clearly defined structure. What had been a chaotic warping of reality resolved into something that looked almost like a doorway, a perfectly circular aperture in space that showed not the stars beyond, but an absolute darkness that seemed to absorb light itself. "Commander," Sarah said urgently, "my scanners are detecting massive gravitational fluctuations from that aperture. Whatever it is, it's affecting the fabric of space throughout the entire sector." Before Santos could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Zelthara's hands flew over her piloting controls as she fought to maintain their position. "Gravitational shear!" she reported. "Something is pulling us toward the Void Reaper formation." Through the viewport, they could see that they weren't the only ones being affected. Debris throughout the system, asteroids, derelict spacecraft, even particles of cosmic dust, was beginning to drift toward the aperture the Void Reapers had created. "It's some kind of gravitational weapon," Vordash hissed, his combat instincts recognizing the threat. "No," Omega-7 corrected, its sensors providing constant analysis of the phenomenon. "Gravitational weapons would create attractive or repulsive forces. This is different. The aperture is not pulling matter toward it. Is pulling space itself." Sarah felt her mind reeling as she tried to comprehend what she was witnessing. They're not creating a weapon, they're creating a passage. But to where? The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep space sensors throughout the Kepler sector, designed to monitor for incoming threats, suddenly began transmitting emergency signals. One by one, their feeds appeared on the reconnaissance ship's communication array, showing views of local space from dozens of different angles. What they revealed was impossible. Through the aperture the Void Reapers had created, ships were emerging. Not Void Reaper vessels, but craft of completely unknown design. Sleek, organic-looking structures that seemed to be made of living metal. They moved with a fluid grace that suggested advanced propulsion systems, but no energy signatures were detectable from their passage. "Fleet emergence continuing," Omega-7 reported, its voice taking on the rapid cadence it used when processing large amounts of data. "Vessel count now exceeding 50 units. No matches to known ship configurations in Galactic database." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Void Reapers hadn't come to the Kepler sector to attack. They had come to open a gateway for an entirely different threat. An invasion force from outside known space. "We have to warn the defense fleet," Thakmore rumbled, reaching for the communication controls. "Negative," Santos said sharply. "Any transmission will reveal our position to both fleets. We need more intelligence about what we're facing before we can risk exposure." Even as she spoke, the unknown vessels emerging from the aperture were beginning to form their own combat formations. Their movements were coordinated but not mechanical, more like a school of fish responding to invisible currents than ships following programmed instructions. Sarah watched the emerging fleet with growing unease. There was something familiar about their movement patterns, something that triggered recognition in the pattern-seeking part of her mind. "Commander," she said slowly, "I think I know what we're looking at." Santos looked at her sharply. "Explain." "The movement patterns of those ships. They're not following standard tactical formations. They're following biological imperatives, pack-hunting behaviors." As if to confirm her analysis, the unknown vessels suddenly burst into motion, streaming away from the aperture toward the inhabited worlds of the Kepler sector. Their formation flowed and shifted like a living thing, individual ships taking positions that maximize their collective effectiveness rather than their individual firepower. "They're not just invaders," Sarah continued, her voice tight with realization. "They're predators. And the Void Reapers have just given them access to our entire galaxy." The scope of the threat was becoming clear. The unknown fleet numbered in the hundreds now, with more ships emerging from the aperture every minute. Each vessel was roughly the size of a destroyer, but their organic design suggested capabilities that conventional military thinking couldn't easily categorize. We need to get closer, Santos decided. Whatever intelligence we can gather about these new ships could be crucial for developing countermeasures. Zalthara adjusted their course, using the gravitational distortions created by the aperture to mask their approach. The Phantom's edge slipped through space like a shadow, its adaptive camouflage making it virtually undetectable as long as they maintained their distance from the main fleets. As they drew nearer, the ship's sensors began picking up more detailed information about the unknown vessels. The data was disturbing. Their hulls appeared to be self-repairing, Omega-7 reported. Molecular analysis indicates a form of programmable matter that can adapt to different environmental conditions. Weapons? Vordash asked. Difficult to determine. No conventional weapon signatures detected, but there are massive energy conduits throughout each vessel that could serve as discharge points for exotic weapon systems. Sarah studied the sensor data, looking for patterns that might reveal tactical weaknesses. What she found instead was even more concerning. They're not just ships, she said quietly. They're learning. What do you mean? Santos asked. Sarah highlighted specific sensor readings on the main display. Each vessel is continuously scanning its environment and sharing data with the others. They're building a real-time map of local space, cataloging every energy signature, every gravitational field, every piece of debris. Standard reconnaissance behavior, Thakmor observed. No, it's more than that. They're learning how to mimic what they observe. Watch this. Sarah showed them how the energy patterns from individual ships were gradually shifting to match background radiation signatures from the Kepler sector.
They're adapting to local conditions, Zalthara realized.
Making themselves harder to detect using our sensor technologies. The implications were staggering. An enemy fleet that could adapt to local conditions faster than defenders could develop countermeasures would be virtually unstoppable using conventional tactics. How long until they reached the inhabited worlds? Santos asked. Omega-7 ran quick calculations. At their current velocity, the leading edge of their formation will reach Kepler Prime in approximately 6 hours. 6 hours until first contact between the unknown fleet and civilian populations. 6 hours to gather enough intelligence to give the Galactic Defense Force a fighting chance. Take us closer, Santos ordered. We need detailed scans of their technology. As they moved deeper into the zone of influence around the aperture, the Phantom's edge began to experience strange effects. The ship's adaptive hull started fluctuating in unexpected ways, as if it was responding to signals the crew couldn't detect. Something is interfering with our camouflage, Zalthara reported, her hands dancing over the piloting controls as she tried to compensate. Sarah watched the hull adaptation patterns with growing concern. It's not interference. They're studying us. Before anyone could respond, the ship's proximity alarms began screaming. On the main display, 3 of the unknown vessels had broken away from the main fleet and were moving directly toward their position. They've detected us, Santos said grimly. All hands prepare for combat maneuvers. But as Sarah watched the approaching ships, she realized that something was fundamentally different about their behavior. The vessels weren't approaching in an attack formation. They were surrounding the Phantom's edge in a pattern that looked disturbingly like a scientific examination. Commander, she said urgently, I don't think they want to destroy us. I think they want to capture us. The 3 unknown vessels closed to within a few hundred meters of the reconnaissance ship, their organic hulls pulsing with patterns of bioluminescent light. Up close, Sarah could see that their surfaces weren't solid metal at all, but some kind of living tissue stretched over a technological framework. They're biological, she breathed. The ships are alive. As if responding to her words, tentacles of living metal extended from the nearest vessel toward the Phantom's edge. The tentacles moved with obvious intelligence, probing the reconnaissance ship's hull and testing its defensive systems. Evasive maneuvers, Santos ordered. Zalthara threw the ship into a series of complex aerobatic patterns that would have been impossible for most pilots to execute. But the unknown vessels matched their every movement with fluid ease, staying close enough to continue their examination while avoiding the Phantom's edge's attempts to break free. They're learning our capabilities, Vordash hissed, his predator's instincts recognizing the behavior. Sarah watched the interplay between the ships with fascination and growing dread. The unknown vessels weren't just studying their technology, they were studying how humans and their allies responded to threats. Every evasive maneuver Zalthara executed, every tactical decision Santos made, every reaction from the crew was being catalogued and analyzed. They're not here to invade, she realized with sudden clarity. They're here to learn how to fight us. The Void Reapers hadn't opened a gateway for an invasion force. They had opened a gateway for a research expedition. The unknown ships were gathering intelligence about galactic military capabilities, studying their potential enemies before launching a full-scale attack. "Commander," Sarah said urgently, "we need to break away now, before they finish their analysis." But even as she spoke, she could see that escape was becoming less likely by the moment. More unknown vessels were breaking away from the main fleet, drawn by the discovery of the reconnaissance ship. Soon they would be surrounded by dozens of the biological craft, each one learning more about galactic technology and tactics. The real invasion hadn't begun yet. This was just the beginning. The Phantom's Edge shuddered as another biomechanical tentacle from the nearest alien vessel made contact with their hull. Through the ship's external cameras, Sarah could see the appendage wasn't just touching their ship. It was somehow interfacing with their systems, drawing data directly from their computers. "They're accessing our databases," Omega-7 reported, its voice taking on an urgent electronic undertone. "Attempting to establish firewalls, but their intrusion methods are unlike anything in my defensive protocols." Sarah watched the readouts with growing alarm. The alien ship wasn't just hacking their systems in any conventional sense. It was learning their language, their technology, their entire cultural framework in real time. "Disconnect all non-essential systems," Commander Santos ordered. "Purge anything that might give them tactical intelligence about the Defense Force." But even as Thekmor's massive hands worked to isolate critical systems, Sarah realized the aliens were after something more fundamental than military secrets. "Commander, they're not accessing our tactical databases," she said, studying the data flow patterns. "They're accessing our educational archives, our cultural records, our historical files." "Why would they want that?" Zelthara asked while continuing her complex evasive maneuvers. Sarah felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking together in her mind. "They're not just learning how to fight us, they're learning how we think. Our decision-making processes, our cultural biases, our behavioral patterns under stress." The implications were terrifying. An enemy that understood not just galactic military capabilities but galactic psychology would be able to predict and counter every strategic decision before it was even made. "Warning," Omega-7 announced. "Detecting similar intrusion attempts on long-range communication networks throughout the Kepler sector. The alien vessels are accessing all available data sources simultaneously." Through the main viewport, Sarah could see the truth of the synthetic being's words. The biological ships spread throughout the system weren't just moving toward inhabited worlds. They were positioning themselves near communication satellites, data relay stations, and orbital computer networks. Each contact allowed them to absorb more information about galactic civilization. "It's a systematic intelligence-gathering operation," Vordash realized, his hunter's instincts recognizing the coordinated nature of the attack. "They're cataloging everything about us before they strike." Sarah's mind raced through the tactical implications. If the aliens could study galactic military doctrine, communication protocols, and command structures before launching their real attack, they would have an unprecedented advantage. Every fleet movement, every tactical decision, every strategic initiative would be predictable to them. "We have to break free and warn the Defense Force," Santos decided. "Even if we can't escape, we need to transmit what we've learned."
"Negative," Sarah said quickly.
"Any transmission will just give them more data to analyze. They'll intercept our communications and learn our warning protocols along with everything else." The biomechanical tentacles continued their data extraction, and Sarah could see that the alien vessels were beginning to change. Their hull configurations were subtly shifting, adapting elements of galactic ship design into their own structures. They were incorporating what they learned into their physical forms. "They're evolving," she breathed. "Not just learning, actually evolving based on what they discover." As if to prove her point, weapon ports began appearing along the hulls of the nearest alien vessels. The weapons looked disturbingly familiar. Energy cannons based on Chronari designs, missile systems that resembled Zephyrian interceptors, defensive shields that mimicked Nexus technology. They're building countermeasures in real time, Thekmor observed grimly. Sarah watched the transformation with growing desperation. The longer they remained in contact with the alien ships, the more dangerous those ships became. But every attempt to break free only provided the aliens with more data about galactic defensive capabilities. It was then that she noticed something in the sensor readings that made her heart race with sudden inspiration. "Commander, I have an idea, but it's going to sound insane." Santos looked at her sharply. "At this point, insane might be our only option." Sarah highlighted specific sensor data on the main display. "The aliens are learning by analyzing our responses to their actions. They're building behavioral models based on how we react to threats. Correct, Omega-7 confirmed. They appear to be mapping our decision-making algorithms. Then we need to give them the wrong data, Sarah said. We need to teach them to expect something that isn't true. Santos frowned.
Explain.
Sarah's fingers flew over her console, pulling up tactical simulations and psychological profiles. Every species in the galaxy has developed specific responses to being outnumbered and outgunned. Chronari go into berserker rage mode. Zephyrians attempt speed-based escape maneuvers. Nexus units optimize for survival probability. And humans? Vordash asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Humans do something completely unpredictable, Sarah replied. We improvise, we break the rules. We do things that no rational analysis would suggest. Quote, diffuso, end quote. She turned to Commander Santos. What if we deliberately feed them false behavioral patterns? What if we make them think they understand human tactics, but give them the wrong model to work with? Santos considered the proposal for a moment. You're suggesting we train our enemies. I'm suggesting we mistrain them, Sarah corrected. We make them expect one thing, so they'll be unprepared when we do something else. The plan was risky beyond measure. It required them to remain in contact with the alien vessels long enough to establish false behavioral patterns, while hoping they could break free before the aliens realized what was happening. Do it, Santos decided. What do you need from us? Sarah was already working on the ship's communication systems. I need everyone to follow very specific behavioral scripts. We're going to convince these aliens that humans always respond to capture attempts by trying to establish communication and negotiation. She uploaded behavioral profiles to each crew member's display. Vakmor, you need to power down your weapons and begin transmitting mathematical sequences. Make it look like you're trying to establish peaceful contact. Zalthara, reduce your evasive maneuvers to minimum levels, as if you're showing compliance. Omega-7, begin broadcasting our cultural databases openly, as if we're trying to demonstrate peaceful intentions. And if this doesn't work, Vordash asked, then we'll be giving them accurate intelligence about how humans actually behave under pressure, Sarah admitted. But right now, that's a chance we have to take. The crew began implementing Sarah's plan. Thekmor powered down the ship's weapons and began broadcasting basic mathematical progressions on multiple frequencies. Zelthara reduced their evasive maneuvers to gentle, non-threatening course corrections. Omega-7 opened selected cultural databases and began transmitting music, art, and literature from across the galaxy. The effect on the alien vessels was immediate and obvious. The biomechanical tentacles increased their data extraction rate, clearly excited by what appeared to be cooperative behavior from their captives. The aliens began broadcasting their own signals in return, complex mathematical sequences that seemed designed to establish communication protocols. They're responding, Santos observed. They think we're trying to talk to them. Sarah monitored the data exchange carefully. The aliens were analyzing every aspect of their peaceful behavior, building models of how galactic species responded to superior force with attempts at negotiation rather than resistance. But underneath the overt cooperation, Sarah was implementing the real plan. While the aliens focused on the obvious communications attempts, she was subtle, manipulating other ship systems to prepare for a very different kind of escape. Phase 2, she announced quietly. Everyone needs to start showing signs of increasing stress and desperation, as if our attempts at peaceful communication are failing. The crew shifted their behavior patterns according to Sarah's direction. Vakmor's mathematical broadcasts became more erratic and urgent. Zelthara began making small, nervous course corrections. Omega-7 started repeating certain cultural transmissions, as if desperately trying to find something the aliens would respond to. The alien vessels adjusted their own behavior in response, their biomechanical interfaces becoming more aggressive, as they interpreted the crew's stress as evidence of communication breakdown. They're learning that humans become predictably desperate when peaceful options fail, Sarah reported, building exactly the behavioral model we want them to have. But the most critical part of the plan was still ahead. Sarah had been using the aliens' focus on communication attempts to mask her real activities. She had been carefully mapping their scanning patterns and identifying blind spots in their sensor coverage. Phase 3, she announced. This is where it gets dangerous. She had discovered that the alien vessel's biomechanical nature created a specific vulnerability. Their living components required regular biological maintenance cycles, brief moments when their sensory capabilities were slightly reduced as biological systems regenerated. I've found a pattern in their scanning cycles, Sarah explained. Every 47 minutes, each ship goes through a biological refresh period that lasts for approximately 30 seconds. During that time, their sensor resolution drops by 15%. Santos checked the chronometer. Next cycle begins in 4 minutes. That's our window, Sarah confirmed. But we can't just run. They'll expect that now that they think they understand our behavioral patterns. We need to do something they won't predict. She outlined the final phase of her plan. Instead of trying to escape directly, they would use the brief sensor gap to reverse course and head straight toward the Void Reaper fleet. The aliens would be watching for escape attempts toward the edge of the system or toward inhabited worlds. They wouldn't expect their prisoners to flee directly toward an even greater threat. That's suicidal, Vordash pointed out.
That's the point, Sarah replied. It's so irrational that they won't have prepared countermeasures for it.
The final minutes passed with agonizing slowness as they maintained their deceptive behavior patterns.
Sarah watched the alien scanning cycles with intense focus, waiting for the precise moment when their window would open. 30 seconds to cycle shift, she announced. The crew prepared for the most desperate escape attempt any of them had ever contemplated. Instead of fleeing to safety, they would be heading directly toward the most dangerous fleet in known space. 10 seconds. Sarah's hands hovered over the ship's emergency controls. Everything depended on perfect timing, and the hope that her analysis of alien behavioral modeling was correct. 5 seconds. The alien vessels around them continued their biological maintenance cycles, their sensor resolution dropping just as Sarah had predicted. Now, Sarah activated every emergency system on the Phantom's Edge simultaneously. The ship's adaptive hull shifted to maximum stealth configuration, its engines went to full power, and its course shifted directly toward the waiting Void Reaper dreadnoughts. For a moment, the alien vessels seemed stunned by the completely unexpected maneuver. Their biomechanical tentacles lost contact with the reconnaissance ship's hull as it accelerated away from them at maximum velocity. But the escape had to be more than just unexpected. It had to reinforce the false behavioral model Sarah had been building. Broadcast surrender signals, she ordered. Make it look like we're fleeing to the Void Reapers for protection, as if we think they're the lesser threat. The message was designed to cement the aliens' belief that humans were predictably illogical under extreme stress, making decisions based on emotion rather than tactical analysis. As the Phantom's Edge raced toward the Void Reaper fleet, Sarah watched the alien vessel's response with satisfaction. Instead of pursuing immediately, they were clearly analyzing the escape attempt, trying to understand the decision-making process that would lead prisoners to flee toward an even greater danger. They're buying it, she reported. They think this is standard human behavior under stress. But their real escape was just beginning. The Void Reaper fleet lay directly ahead, 12 massive dreadnoughts arranged around the aperture they had created. Flying toward them was only marginally less suicidal than remaining captured by the biological ships. Please tell me you have a plan for getting past the Void Reapers, Santos said. Sarah smiled grimly. I do. But you're really not going to like it. The Phantom's Edge raced through space toward the Void Reaper fleet at maximum velocity, while behind them the biological alien vessels began their pursuit. Sarah's desperate gambit had bought them precious time, but now they faced an even deadlier threat. 12 dreadnoughts that had never been defeated in open combat. Range to Void Reaper perimeter, 200,000 kilometers and closing, Omega-7 reported.
Estimated time to weapons range, 4 minutes, 30 seconds. Sarah's fingers flew across her sensor controls, analyzing every detail of the Void Reaper formation.
The massive ships maintained their geometric arrangement around the space-time aperture, but now she could see that their positioning wasn't just ceremonial, it was functional.
They're using their ships as focusing elements for the aperture, she realized. Each dreadnought is contributing specific energy frequencies to maintain the space-time distortion. Commander Santos studied the tactical display. What does that mean for us? It means they can't move without destabilizing the aperture, Sarah replied. They're locked in position as long as they want to keep that gateway open. But even as she spoke, she could see weapons ports opening along the hulls of the nearest Void Reaper dreadnoughts. Being unable to move didn't make them helpless. Incoming energy signatures, Zilfara announced, her enhanced vision detecting the subtle distortions that preceded Void Reaper weapon discharge. Multiple targeting locks acquired. Sarah watched the targeting patterns with growing desperation. The Void Reapers were preparing to destroy them long before they reached the fleet perimeter. Their escape attempt was about to end in a burst of exotic radiation. That's when she noticed something that changed everything. Wait, she said urgently, studying her sensor readings more carefully. Look at their targeting solutions. On the tactical display, she highlighted the firing vectors from each Void Reaper dreadnought. The energy beams would converge not on the Phantom's edge, but on the pursuing biological vessels. They're not targeting us, Santos realized. They're targeting the aliens behind us. The implications hit the crew simultaneously. The Void Reapers weren't trying to destroy the reconnaissance ship, they were defending it from the biological fleet. Why would they protect us? Deckmore asked, his massive hands unconsciously gripping his weapon controls. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. The Void Reapers were known for their interest in testing galactic military capabilities. They had brought the biological fleet through their aperture, but perhaps not as allies. What if this isn't an alliance? She said slowly. What if the Void Reapers opened the aperture to bring the biological fleet here as test subjects? What if they want to see how we fight against this new threat? The idea was both hopeful and terrifying.
If the Void Reapers were treating the biological invasion as an experiment, it meant they might not be directly hostile to galactic civilization. But it also meant they were willing to use entire star systems as laboratories for their cosmic research.
Void Reaper weapons firing, Omega-7 announced. Through the viewports, they could see streams of exotic energy lancing out from the dreadnoughts toward the pursuing biological vessels. The alien ships tried to evade, their organic hulls rippling and flowing as they attempted to dodge the incoming fire, but Void Reaper weapons operated on principles that conventional physics couldn't explain. The energy beams didn't travel through space. They simply existed between their points of origin and their targets, making evasion impossible. 3 of the biological vessels vanished in bursts of cascading energy, their living metal hulls unable to withstand the assault. The remaining alien ships broke off their pursuit immediately, retreating toward the main biological fleet at maximum velocity. "We're clear," Santos said with obvious relief. But Sarah was still studying the sensor readings, and what she saw made her stomach clench with dread. "No, we're not," she said quietly. "Look at the energy patterns from the Void Reaper weapons." She highlighted specific readings on the main display. They weren't using maximum power against the biological ships. Those were demonstration shots. Warning shots. The crew absorbed this information in silence. The Void Reapers had saved them, but only to preserve their value as experimental subjects. Range to aperture, 50,000 kilometers, Zalthara reported. At their current velocity, they would reach the space-time distortion in less than 2 minutes. Sarah still hadn't explained her plan for getting past the Void Reaper fleet, and time was running out.
Commander, she said,